Hello, and welcome to Live or Just Blethering, a podcast where two 30-somethings discuss the music we found and loved growing up. My name is Keith McLeod, and with me is my fellow host, Chris Lavender. Today, with our special guest Alan Swan, we'll be discussing Slipknot.
First time, Keith. First time. Well done.
Thanks very much.
That was a proper. That's customer service voice right there. That's
almost
like,
every time we have a
phone
guest.
There's a guest curse that we have we have to do the intro like 6 or 7 times before we get it right.
And especially if you're like doing it in front of someone new as well, you're like, no, like, I don't want to have to do it a million times. Like.
Totally. Well, welcome everyone to the podcast. There are 3 of us today. I think we've got a AOEGB first. Actually, dare I say we don't have a 30-something amongst us?
No, I am 30.
You are 30.
I am 30. Well,
Just
like 30. Right. Wait, what year is it? 2022. I'm 32 this year. Like,
Great. Yeah, actually, it's not a AOGB first. We have everyone is of appropriate age. Welcome to everyone. If you are new to the podcast, thanks for joining us. If you're a returning listener, it's about time we got around to Slipknot, I would say. Isn't that right?
It's a long time coming. This one was always panned out as like, we need to do something special for this. And we've been mulling it and pushing it back and trying to think of ways to do it. And then on one particularly boozy afternoon, I bumped into Alan.
Got cornered at the bar with some bucky bombs.
And well, here we are. This is the culmination of that afternoon. So welcome, Alan. Alan is a gig photographer throughout Edinburgh, and I just knew that Alan was into this. So
yeah. I love my metal. That's all I know.
Thanks for joining us, man. And well, look, it's the reason we've been pushing it back is because it's such a big undertaking. I think we're all, well, Lav and I, you and I have been pretty consistent fans throughout their time. I was just saw a Star Wars meme, and it was them. The lion from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and it's like, don't quote the ancient magics to me, which I was there when it was written, and like you and I were there when Slipknot was written. Like it was totally, we've came along with the band. So to try and do it justice, I don't know if we ever will, but where did you guys, Alan, let's go with yourself, where did you find and start your sort of relationship with Slipknot?
It's a weird one. I think it's like, again, it was that one that was like, it was always the logo, the t-shirt, the name that you seen on every goth kid's hoodie, t-shirt, poster on the wall, and it was just like, you had to know them. Like, that was it. There was no two ways about it. It was like the biggest, weirdest thing that was out there, and they just were just like a juggernaut from the beginning. And you just had to figure out what was going on with it, and it was heavy, it was ridiculous, it was just, like, as a kid growing up with metal, it was like, the obsession was what's heavier, what's more ridiculous, what's more, like, fun, what else can I get out of this, and they absolutely, balls to the wall, just hit it on the head. Like, it was just metal, live, everything.
Were you always a metal fan before Slipknot, or were Slipknot a bit of a gateway band for you into metal?
I think they were there like at the beginning of the gateway. Like, it was like them, Rammstein, oddly enough, Sum 41, AC/DC, stuff like that. That was like my gateways in. Was like my dad's CDs in the car, and just like kind of figured my own way through it. Again, like, I lived rural, so I was the only goth kid in the village, and I had to absolutely figure my own way through it, and which gave me like a great open-ended view of metal, because I didn't really have anyone to be like, no, you shouldn't be listening to this, you should listen to this instead, or whatever. It was just like, had me, Scuzz TV, and LimeWire. And,
Good beginnings, man. Good beginnings. Like absolutely everyone had that at some point in their life. Yeah.
I can completely empathize with that, being the rural kid. Fair enough, I wasn't on my own. There was only like maybe 3 or 4 of us in the village that we lived in that listened to what could be described as goth music, and there was no two ways about it. In the year 2001, you were either a chav or you were a goth. There was no such thing. We never had skaters or all these little bits in the middle. It was literally
nuances.
It was literally black and white. You were this or that. So we were the goths in the village, and I think something like the internet. If the internet hadn't happened when it did for me, anyway, I don't know where I would have ended up. But it was.
I would never have had that discovery period at all without it. Like, especially like again going through like LimeWire, Napster, downloading what you thought was Avenged Sevenfold. It turns out it was like a Bleeding Through song and stuff like that. And it was like wildly like, oh yeah, this is the one song that I like by them. And it was like, turns out it's not them.
It's not them at all. There's lots of examples of that we'll be talking about this throughout this episode. It's Slipknot were there at that point, so it's the same sort of time period that I'm in, that sort of 14-year-old me with an internet connection, with Napster, and just wanting to discover more. Similar story to yourself. There was a couple of guys at the school that were walking around with the Slipknot hoodie, and there was just a name. As soon as you saw the name, it was like, that's a very catchy name I can remember. I'm going to go home and I'm going to. You didn't Google it then. You just, I don't know, asked Jeeves or whatever who was Slipknot.
It was like,
what is Yahoo.
Slipknot? That's it. Yeah.
It was like every parent's red flag as well. It was.
Oh yeah.
Oh, does your kid listen to Slipknot? My kid listens to Slipknot. Should I be concerned? Like, I bought him the Kerrang CD the other day. Like, my aunt bought me the Kerrang CD, and I'm pretty sure my parents had to listen to it first just to make sure it was okay. Like,
it was maybe like the early 2000s version of like D&D in the 80s. They were just like, oh no, these are Satan worshippers and whatnot. No, totally. I had a very different introduction to the band, really, and I'm sure I've mentioned it before on the pod, but I didn't like Slipknot when they first came out. 1999, the first album comes out, and Wait and Bleed is getting played absolutely everywhere. Or if you saw the original video, the sort of the Tool claymation video as well, and I didn't like it. Like, I had a couple of friends older than me, the year above me, but sort of where I lived, they were the closest friends, and they were into it, and they were sort of enjoying Slipknot and stuff like that. But like, I was just finding my feet with like heavy and aggressive music, and I landed with Linkin Park and Papa Roach. So Slipknot were just too different for me at the time, and I largely ignored the first album. And dare I say, I probably fucking said something like, "They're just noise," like "Give me Chester" or "Give me death." Has that ever been said before?
Just you.
But well, just you. Give me Chester or give me death. And it was only when Iowa came out and I heard Left Behind, like the guitar tone on Left Behind, that like first 30 seconds of that guitar riff was just, and it's a running theme in sort of bands we've heard on the podcast mostly. It's like, it was just something you hadn't heard before. Like, it was totally wild and just like this twisty metal of this like, and I was like, that's fucking amazing. And then the drums drop in, and then just like the really simple beat and stuff like that on top of that, and that was all of a sudden something switched for me, and I was like, fucking hell, these guys are actually amazing. I never actually went back to the first album until quite a few years later, but I was on them from Iowa, and I still to this day probably think Iowa was one of their best albums.
So I remember the guy with the hoodie at school, and I was like, he's cool, I want to be like him. So I went to the local music shop, and they literally had that one copy that they probably bought in every like 2 months or something, and I bought it and I took it home, and I remember pressing play on my CD player and just being like, holy fuck, what is this? This is something otherworldly. And yeah, I'd listened to like Linkin Park. I think I'd listened to like the Issues by Korn, and I might have had. I don't think I'd even had like a Deftones album by this point. And I think I listened to Papa Roach. I would have listened to like, so Papa Roach, Linkin Park, they were probably my go-tos. And then I put this on and I'm like, whoa, this is just blowing my mind how heavy it is. The vocals are so aggressive. The tone in the whole thing, because it's, you know, you've got Sid on the vinyl scratching, you've got the samples that Craig's supplying with the fucking kegs and all the percussion. There's 9 of them. What is going on? Just total noise. And it's the kind of thing I would put on, and then I'm like, oh, I'm gonna have to turn it down in case my mum or dad hears this. Like, this is too extreme.
I think that's one thing I didn't like about the band to begin with, was I saw the masks and the boiler suits as too much of a gimmick. Now that's what they are. Like, at the end of the day, like, it is a gimmick. It is an attention-seeking thing. It is, or not so much attention-seeking, but like, you know, something to differentiate them, to make them stand out. You know, to in those early days to get seen and stuff like that. They go into more detail as to the process behind the masks, but at the end of the day, I saw that as a bit of a gimmick, and I was like, oh, these guys are literally just clowns. Fuck these guys. They're just dancing about on stage. But I don't know what it was about Iowa and Left Behind, but something from there, because then you had like songs like Disaster Piece and People Equal Shit and stuff like that, like just totally like took me away with them. And I think I was borderline addicted to Left Behind. I had to hear that song like every day for probably months on end. Like, mini disc player, crack it on as soon as I'm at school, headphones in, just, you know, walking up the road to school, and it was something else.
I think just seeing the sentence or the words together, people equal shit, when you're like a young teenager, was just insane. It was like the fact that people were making music that just had a title, people equal shit, like on the back of a hoodie and a t-shirt at like in high school. You're getting sent home. Like,
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You're not only have you got a meeting with whatever like school counsellor there, but there's a letter going home to your parents, and probably a priest might get involved depending on how serious your parents took it.
I was at a particularly strict school that you weren't allowed, never mind wearing band t-shirts or things with swear words on them, you were absolutely not allowed to wear jeans. Like, if you turned up in jeans or denim, you got sent home.
or like I wore like the old school like baggy jeans, like
Bernie's
that you used to
Blades.
buy from like Flip from
Yeah.
Edinburgh.
Oh,
And it was
Jankos.
just like the most like ridiculous sized ones ever. Those, and like again, it was like being in the village town, whatever, was that the school had no experience with dealing with this. They were like, jeans, okay, yeah, cool. They're really, really baggy. Why is there pieces of metal on your boots? Like, it had like New Rocks at school, then like a wallet, chain, obviously, and then a choker and stuff. And yeah, just like full, like ridiculous 90s, early 2000s goth kid. Like,
I just had, I generally, or luckily our uniform was like actually quite a simple polo shirt, or when you were a senior, like just a white shirt and the Avril Lavigne tie. Nice. But I sort of wore like the loosest jeans I could get away with. You were technically weren't supposed to wear jeans either, but these were like a sort of weird black denim that weren't, you know, they weren't exactly Levi's or anything, but they were just like, you know, they're slightly looser. And I had the pocket chain, and that was the extent. Like, we had goth kids at our school. You know, we had kids going around and with like the heavy eyeliner and lace gloves, and you know, they were pushing the uniform as far as they could get away with and stuff like that. And they were cool. I was friends with most of them. But I literally just had slightly loose jeans and a pocket chain, and one kid, like a couple of years below me, was just like, "Are you a goth?" And I was like, oh. Do you know what? I fucking wish I had the balls to be a goth. Like, all I'm doing is wearing slightly looser jeans. But that's, no doubt, that's the experience we all had growing up, where like that was the limitations of majority of the people around you, where if you wore slightly anything out of the norm, well then shit, you were the goth kid, or you were the freak or
finding
whatever.
out all the nicknames that you didn't know that were for it. So it was like Mosher, Grebo, Sweaty, all
See,
these other
we never had that.
names and stuff. Like,
We just never
Oh,
had
that'd be-
that. We just had you were either like I say a goth or a chav. So you were either listening to dance music or you're listening to Slipknot. There was so little in between, and it wasn't until I met a bunch of other people like that weren't connected with my school that they started using phrases like skater or trendy and things to describe like other social groups that I was like, oh, thank God I'm not a goth. Oh, you know, this like moment of like, oh, I don't have to live with that label anymore. And then I grew into the skater, so I had the baggy jeans, carried a skateboard for show, and listened to Slipknot and listened to Korn and wore a Korn hoodie. Usually that was my go-to.
But yeah, like you were saying, Alan, like anyone listening to this podcast, if you were a 30-something, you have at one point in your life listened to Slipknot. Like not even if it was intentional. If you've been at a club night, hell, if you've just been at a gig waiting for the band to come on, or if you've been in any way, shape, or form related to, listening to, involved with like nu metal or a heavier music set at any point in your life, Slipknot have been there at some point, like abso-frequently. Or you've seen the logo, or you've seen the T-shirt, you've seen the hoodie, like
Someone's made you watch that Duality video and told you that the kid, that's his house. The guy from the beginning of the video is something like that.
Yeah. You know, you've seen the baseball bat to the keg. You've like, in the early years, you've seen like the goat's heads or whatever like that. I did. I don't even know where this puts me, but in like what, fourth year, you had to do like a spoken word thing. You had to like stand up and do a talk and a presentation, and it was graded and whatever. So like my first grade, my first talk, I did bass guitar. And I was, oh yeah, this is bass, blah, 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 blah. And I think I got like, I don't know, like a 3 or a 2. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with like Scottish standard grade or credit grades, like not bad. Top was 1 and like 7 was a fail. So I got like a 3 or a 2. So I did all right. But then the teacher was like, if anyone wants to get a better grade, you can do another talk. And I fucking came back and did Slipknot. And at the end of it, like they were just like, doesn't like all the kids in the class were like, doesn't the guy wank his nose? Doesn't the guy wank his nose? And the teacher is just the whole time, the 10-15 minutes I was talking, she was just like, yeah, you get a 1, Keith, well done, fucking. And that's the only time I ever got a 1 in English. The top grade was because I did a talk on Slipknot.
I had such a weirdly similar experience where it was actually Roadrunner United.
Yes, Alan. Yes, our favorite album on the pod.
If we had an essayist,
I actually like it's one of the episodes that I have listened to, and I accidentally, like, before I knew it, I was on eBay and bought the Roadrunner United concert DVD. Is in the house. Like, it's just like, sat and watched that with Rachel the other day, and it was like, yeah, just ridiculous. Like all this like cover songs by like the biggest names in like contemporary metal, like the poster childs, like Matt Heafy, obviously, as well. And like, yeah, it was just like, yeah, it just seemed so bizarre that you had like a talk about doing Slipknot, and I was like, I don't want to put Roadrunner United. It was just the weirdest, like, it was too similar. It was weird. Like,
how did it go? What did you cover?
again, it was one of these things that's like, I absolutely hated getting up and talking. That was like one of my absolute fears, like, of all time, was to kind of do that things. But because it was metal, and it was like, metal was like well, music in general was like so all consuming by that point in my life, that it was just like, I didn't need to prepare anything. I just got up and just rattled through what I needed to talk about, and anyone could ask me anything, and I was like absolutely prepared to answer whatever else that had like opinions on it, knowledge on it, love for it. And it was just like, that's again, that's probably when it became very apparent to me that metal was going to be my way of life in the future, whether I wanted it or not. Like, that was it. Like,
For the record, I just want to disclose on the pod that Alan and I were talking days or weeks ago, and we were discussing the Roadrunner episode, and Alan was totally in my camp about, you know, it being a good album, and you know, you could have your comment, Lav, about just make a
Don't make a
compilation
compilation.
album.
Don't make it.
Yeah, speaking of compilation, go fuck yourself, man. Go make a
I
compilation.
stand by it. I stand by that. That was a struggle. But anyway, we're here to talk about Slipknot today.
We are. We've got so much to cover.
Change your topic. No, I was going to say, so like the first time I put on the album, it obviously took my breath away. And we kind of touched on earlier about going through, you with LimeWire or Kazaa. For me, it was I was there at the beginning of Napster, and I knew there was a new album coming out. There was news that there was a Slipknot album that was about to land. This was before Left Behind had been like released on MTV or what. So I made sure that I was like looking around for the leaks, digging through any sort of like any title that was available on Napster with the word Slipknot in it. And some people would name their songs, new material, unreleased, or, new album, whatever, just to get people to download it. And
what a way to catfish someone, eh?
oh, you got some interesting stuff. Oftentimes, it was someone, I think, who had just genuinely downloaded something and they'd mislabeled it. Like, I don't think there was that much malicious intent. With some of them, though, the ones that were like new, it's off Iowa, off the unreleased and the new album, they knew what they were doing. But that is how I ended up discovering the songs from Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat. Specifically the song Slipknot and the song Bitch Slap. And when you've been listening to basically Slipknot for a little bit, a few of my friends were heavy into like Mike Patton, heavy into like Primus, and then I hear Bitch Slap. So I remember burning that onto a CD and taking it to a house party and playing it, and they were like, "Oh, what's this?" And it's like total funk metal
ruining
breakdown.
Someone's party. Absolutely ruining it. It was like, please never come back.
You're not welcome. You're not welcome.
Yeah.
It was honestly one of those songs because if for anyone who hasn't ever listened to Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat, I would recommend it on the basis that it's absolutely batshit crazy. Like there is nothing, there's no Slipknot in it. I mean, there's a few bits where they used a couple of choruses and a few verses, and they learned a lot through the making of Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat. How to record so many different percussion instruments in a room without it sounding like shit. They learned that, and Mate, Feed, Kill, Repeat, they put a lot of money into it. So they were, when they did land a deal with Roadrunner in 98, 99, it meant that the first album sounded fan-fucking-tastic. And as much as Keith is going to protest that Iowa sounds better, I still have an absolute nostalgic soft spot for how good the first album sounds.
Am I going to say Iowa sounds better?
I mean, you were just saying that's what the album that got you into it, so...
Yeah, it's the album that got me into it. I've since gone back and now have an appreciation for that album. I've probably listened to it, the most I ever have has been in the last week. I mean, I'll admit that straight away. I've gone back, I've listened to it, I've heard the album before, but I've never been as familiar with it as I have with everything from Iowa onwards. But I really quite like Slipknot, to be fair.
And it was only recently, within the last sort of year or so, thanks to a video on YouTube by Justin Wang, discovered that the version that I got, which was the second release, was missing 2 songs.
Yeah.
And I never had the version with Frail Limb Nursery and Purity on. Those songs didn't exist. So, and interestingly, one of my favourite Slipknot songs from the first album is the one that they replaced those 2 songs with, Me Inside. And that absolutely, like, it shocked me that the one song that was my favourite wasn't actually on the original first release of the self-titled album. And I mean, the story of the removal of Frail Limb Nursery and Purity is pretty much bullshit, I think, is the...
Yeah, you sent me the video on this. It's a weird one. Are you familiar with this one at all, Alan?
Yeah, I think I listened to it as well. It's like the kind of... Is it getting more kind of experimental kind of song, right? It's just like them kind of speaking over something, or is that a different track? I can't remember.
The Frail Limb Nursery was a clip that was taken from a murder mystery website. The story about Purity Night was the story that accompanied this. Now, the website wasn't explicit in its time that it was fiction.
Fictional. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where they got in trouble for it, right? Or
That's
like,
it. So they were ripping on something. It was essentially like writing a song effectively about Harry Potter, and then J.K. Rowling being like, "Fuck you guys using my intellectual property." And just for the record, fuck J.K. Rowling. But at the same time,
Amen.
At the same time, this was them being inspired by something. Okay, the recording that they used, Frail Limb Nursery, it's there's nothing to it. It is just a wee little sort of sample track, little intro track.
one of those
into
kind of
Fury.
like skits, right?
That's a good
kind
word.
of name they go for it, yeah.
So there's this little recording, and then into a song called Purity. They removed both of them. They re-released the album with those two songs off and another song added, and they'd also tidied up a couple of other songs as well. They'd remastered another couple of them in that time because they must have had a bit of money from the sales from the first album, from the first release. And it wasn't until the 10-year anniversary that Purity actually got added on an album, even though they played it live on the 2005 live album, I think.
Yeah, they basically got ownership back of Purity, but they've maybe for argument's sake they've not gone back and reused the
apologies.
Samples.
The first time they actually were able to put it on Masterpieces Disc 2 as an audio only bonus feature.
Ugh.
Audio only bonus feature, is that just not what a CD is?
Yeah, that's just a CD, man.
But it was on a DVD, but it was only on the DVD. That was it.
So it was a DVD disc but had an MP3 on it.
Yeah, you literally pick it and it's just a black background, but it's playing Purity. But if you'd never heard that song before, and it was a band song, so it ends up Streisand affecting it and just making it like totally people want to hear it. Why is it banned?
So Slipknot, the first album, not the band, the first album, just did not listen to it when it first came out. But in going back to it now, like, yeah, it's great. There's loads of good things on it that I like. You can obviously hear where Slipknot have came from, and this is this was their beginning, and that's cool. But I tell you what, like, to say like, this was entirely new and I never heard anything like this before and it's totally unique and blah blah blah. I got a lot of Cold Chamber vibes out of the first Slipknot album. Now, I'm not a massive Cold Chamber fan. I have talked about the vocalist before because found him off of Roadrunner, think he's an amazing vocalist, but they're not entirely, not to Slipknot's discredit because no one is entirely unique anymore, but like they're you can hear their influence as well. Like we were talking before about Feed, Make, Kill, Repeat and stuff, and how they were influenced very early on by Mike Patton and Mr. Bungle and stuff like that, and we sort of said that album was a bit like off air, sorry for anyone who's listening, maybe a bit confused, off air before we started recording, it's a bit like Pantera meets the Chili Peppers. There's like the sort of weird funk fusion metal thing going on in there. Like Slipknot's great, but with hindsight, for me anyway, I can see influences in bands that were doing similar things at the time. Is that fair to say?
I feel like Make, Feed, Kill, Repeat is like a sort of, it was something that they would send out to hundreds, if not thousands, of record labels, and it's just to show this is what we can do. Mold us. You make us do what you want us to do. Here's 8 tracks of us doing balls to the wall metal, funk, psychedelic, drill noises. With how, just to show how different music can be. And at that time in the 90s, record labels were looking for the next, always looking for the next big thing. But in the 90s, things were getting a little bit weird. Bands were being a bit more experimental, and they've put this out there, and it is an extremely experimental album. And clearly, it landed on Roadrunner's desk, and they were the ones that were like, "We want the metal." So they tightened all that up, and then brought this fantastic metal album to the front, which, yes, it was the first time or we probably experienced that type of thing. But it has to sort of have some link to what may have come slightly before it. Cool Chambers is a great example of a band where they were writing bouncing riffs. But I think they landed right square in the middle of the new metal phase.
100%.
That full MTV era, like, metal that just came out of nowhere, really, and was, like, the biggest genre.
Limp Bizkit, Korn, Slipknot, that was the sentence, and you've got all this, they just, that wave, they didn't start it by any means. I don't think, in hindsight, they are a new metal band. That first album is a new metal album, I would say, because it does have a lot of the tropes of new metal. But by the time Iowa came out,
I'd probably put Iowa in with new metal as well.
I would, yeah, like, just that kind of, like, basic bouncy riff. That was like new metal again is like, it's actually like a weirdly vague genre at times, and again it's like, it's not just even the music, it's the kind of vibe that comes with it, and like when it happened, and even like the ridiculous over the top live thing and the boiler suits and everything, that kind of like Wes Borland from Limp Bizkit kind of, that whole thing of just being like different visually, audibly, and just everything else as well. It wasn't just a particular type of music, it was like there was a whole thing behind it, and there was like a whole wave that came with it.
I would describe Iowa as a more straightforward, compared to the previous, in relation to the previous album, a much more straightforward metal album. And I think they really drew a line on like the line in the sand to say, like, we are a metal band. We have new metal elements, but ultimately we're a metal band.
I would agree that Iowa is more straightforward than, say, what Slipknot was, but I would still put Iowa and Slipknot in the same boat. And we talked about this on the chat, when Volume 3 came out, that was the shift, that was the change. So Iowa and Slipknot, very much of the same variety, same origins, and a far more sharper change in direction when it came to Volume 3.
Okay.
Like, Iowa was just like a tightening up and more extreme Slipknot.
Yeah.
Like,
Heretic Anthem.
Just
like Heretic, just like the absolute... That's a song that will always forever blow me away, because there's like 90 seconds of just... I mean, I probably should have listened to more like speed metal or death metal, but just like that beatdown of just like the absolute brutal double kick and just like the absolute brutal chug and like the chun 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 chun. That is Disaster Piece, isn't it? No, I'm talking about Heretic Anthem. That is Heretic Anthem, isn't it?
Disaster Pieces was the one from the Resident Evil movies.
Yeah, so Heretic Anthem is the one with just like the absolute brutal...
No, that was My Plague. Sorry, that was My Plague.
My Plague's, that's one.
Oh, we've just listened to too much Slipknot. Anyway, yeah, Slipknot and Iowa, same boat. Volume 3 is where things personally started to change. It's what I said on the chat. Iowa was their last weird album. And I mean that respectfully. I don't mean like, it was weird and kind of didn't get it. No, it was weird in a good way, because they were more experimental. That's the wrong way to put it. It felt more experimental. It felt like they were trying different things, and just throwing in the odd sample or like this fucking weird guitar sound or whatever, and the song structure was a little less traditional, shall we say. But without a shadow of a doubt, from 1999 to 2022, Slipknot have gradually became more... What's the word I'm looking for here? I don't want to say generic. Have become more structured, have become more traditional, have become
accessible.
Yeah. And that journey
sensible.
Absolutely started with Volume 3. There's no denying that. Especially, you look at the songs that got released for Iowa. So, Left Behind, which you talked about, and My Plague from the Resident Evil movies. And then you look at the songs that were released for Volume 3, you know, the Vermilion, Before I Forget, and Duality.
Vermilion Part 2, and apparently the Nameless got a live release, and the Blister Exists got a release. So say we all. So says Wikipedia.
And that was 2004 that Volume 3 came out. And by that point, my tastes had moved and shifted slightly away from extreme metal, as we've sort of covered on the pod, as I moved more into a bit, I don't know how to describe it, sort of that UK indie scene. You know, we've talked about like bands like Rubin. I would mention bands like Million Dead, Funeral for a Friend, Hellas for Heroes. These sort of bands, I think I obviously, like, looking inwards, by that point, by 2004, that was when I was turning 18 and I'd learned to drive and I was going to more gigs on my own. And obviously the UK bands were touring a lot more than these big American bands. So I suppose just through happenstance, I gravitated towards bands that I was more likely to see live. And certainly by that point, other than the singles from Volume 3, the Subliminal Verses, I really didn't really give a lot of time to the Subliminal Verses, I don't think. What about you, Alan?
I think, again, I think seeing the Duality video and them just wrecking this house in this video was just like, again, as a teenager growing up through seeing that was just like the coolest thing. It was just like, again, that's what a lot of Slipknot was just like, this is ridiculous, this is over the top, this is like, yeah, going to get me, if I'm wearing the t-shirt at school, I'm going to get sent home kind of thing. You're just like, that was it. That was always the fun of it, was like something you're probably not supposed to be doing. Your mum's going to be raging at you, like, like that kind of thing.
And that's sort of where that absolutely was a lot of the appeal for the band at the time as well. We can sit here and be like, oh yeah, this, you know, this was something we'd never heard before, and like the music was amazing and stuff like that. But also at the same time, we all must have got caught up in what we now recognise to be like the brand of the band. Like, the masks were weird, they were, you know, quite extreme in their shows. Like, how many videos do you see someone stage diving off of like a ridiculous stack of speakers and stuff like that? Like, yeah, visually they were incredibly like provocative and edgy, and yeah, as a sort of 16-year-old kid, you're like, this is wrong. This is possibly wrong. There was absolutely no harm in it whatsoever.
Yeah.
But, you know, we're not going to like throw Slipknot under the bus and say they're responsible for a school shooting, because that's America's gun laws. But they were absolutely something that your parents wouldn't have approved of, and so you wanted to do it more.
So something to sort of like compare and contrast with is Kiss. Okay?
Yeah.
There's a band in the 70s.
Man, I was taking a drink. You can't just say Kiss. You can't compare Kiss and Slipknot when I was taking a drink and nearly fucking choked.
You can't deny the similarities in their marketing here. Kiss were, you know, they wore, there was one called the Demon, one was the Star Child. They wore makeup. They looked like metal. You know, they had like spikes on their shoulders, and they played fucking BC Rich guitars, and, you know, studs and things. They really like metal looking band.
And they also had the biggest merch table.
Well, that's Gene Simmons' business acumen coming to the foray. But they had this image, and they stuck to it for a bit. They came makeup off for a little bit. That went shite, so they went back to the makeup. And, you know, the difference is, though, if you listen to Kiss, they didn't sound heavy. They were never a heavy band. They were extremely accessible. And Slipknot, they've got the masks, they've got the boiler suits, and they look extreme, and they make extreme music.
Yeah.
And that was sort of like this really refreshing thing about it. And I know that this is going to rub some people the wrong way, but Keith's going to agree with me on this.
Stop saying I'm going to agree with you with
You're
shit.
going to agree with me because Slayer are another
Get
fucking
dragged in.
are another Kiss like.
Oh, have we had this conversation on the pod? I know we've recorded this conversation, but I don't know if we've released this conversation.
I don't think it's
before
ever been made public.
I can't remember your guys' opinion on Slayer. Like, is negative, right? Like,
I don't have a problem with them. I think the music's brilliant. I think they are brilliant musicians.
I do not like Slayer.
However,
okay.
I have a problem with Tom Araya making satanic lyrics for money because he's a devout Catholic.
Yeah, have you ever, I take it you've seen
I don't have a problem with him being
Journey.
Catholic. I want to get that absolutely in. Like, just I want to nail that in there. I don't have a problem with him having a religion. That's absolutely fine. But he is on record admitting that he writes provocative lyrics to make money, because it's a gimmick to sell.
That's that like metal, a headbanger's journey film. I don't know if you guys ever seen that.
No.
Man, you need to see that. That was my childhood. There was just like growing up, there was like a metal documentary, and it was the coolest thing ever. But yeah, Tom Araya was in it, and he's on record he was just like, yeah, God doesn't hate us all. That's it. he's like it's not my job. He's just like, yeah, some dude that says God hates us all on an album is mad as well, especially for someone that didn't believe it. Yeah, I think I get your distaste with that. That makes sense to me.
So that's I may be standing a little bit hypocritical in myself as well, because I am, now that I'm older and I can see Slipknot and I have seen them over the years develop and stuff like that, I'm fully aware Slipknot are a brand. Like, these guys exist to make money, and I think they have probably done a cracking job at making money. I'm not saying these guys are all like multi-billionaires or whatever, but as a band, they've stood the test of time. They've sold albums. They've got, they do world tours. They've got their own fucking festival, Knotfest. They've they've got a really strong merchandise sensibility. These guys exist to make money. They have turned this band into a business. That is almost why I hate Slayer. Because, well, one, I'm just not a fan of the music. I've just never been a fan of a Slayer song. Every time I've heard a Slayer song, I've just kind of been like, all right, yeah, cool. But it's very much like the perception of the band that has never really had me enter the music. Because, as far as I'm concerned, they're just two guys there to make money. Like, and that's how I've always viewed Slayer. Like, Slayer are their own brand. And it's exactly what I've just said about Slipknot. Like, these guys exist, to be a heavy metal thrash band, and to be perceived as a thrash band, and to be like hard and fucking brutal and savage, and they'll write satanic lyrics while being devout Catholics, and they'll do this and that, because at the end of the day it's just a show for them. Now, it is just a show for Slipknot as well, but at the end of the day I like Slipknot and I don't like Slayer.
Fair enough. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Slipknot, I mean, Slipknot as a brand, that's all Sean. From day one, he used to wear the clown mask at practices, and then that sort of like bled into the live shows. But early on, Sean took this seriously. He was like, this is going to be our thing. And they went to great lengths early on in their careers to not be seen unmasked. They did interviews in the masks. They obviously did all their live shows in masks. And it became a brand identity, and it also sort of was a bit of a good thing for them to not be recognised. I can't remember which band member said it, but they were like, I can go to the shops. People don't know who I am, and that's absolutely fine with me.
Yeah, and that was part of like the magic of the band as well, where, early days of the internet, of MySpace or whatever, Volume 3 comes out, and, I can't remember by this point if Stone Sour had came out. If you were
after Stone Sour. Well after.
Yeah, so like you're on the internet, you're looking for like, Corey Taylor unmasked, Mick Thompson unmasked. Like, that was part of like the mystique of the guys, was who were these dudes. So, they totally knew what they were doing, and bloody hell, got me involved.
Yeah, I gave that Stone Sour album a listen earlier, which is why I know the date. So that was 2002.
I just didn't bother.
Oh no.
I put that joke in the chat. I don't think it got enough attention.
No, I purposely ignored it. It's fine.
Yeah, I purposely ignored it too. I must admit, listening to Stone Sour was a reminder of why I didn't get into Stone Sour.
Yeah, I never stuck with them. What about you, Alan?
I actually seen them a couple of times.
Intentionally?
Again, they were well, yeah, like again, this is where it kind of gets a bit weird. Is like, well, not weird, but like as a kid that, again, like being the only kid that liked this stuff and the only person that I knew that liked this stuff, I just went to like any gig that I could get my hands on. I mean, like any gig. I used to go to like 50, 60 gigs a year at least, like for the first like 5, 6 years I was into stuff, and that was it. It was just like if there was a gig in Glasgow that I could get to one way or another, I was at it. I wanted to see everything. That was again where like very kind of open ended, just managed to see everything I could get my hands on. So it kind of like there's a lot of people that have never really got to experience that. Like they kind of just liked what they liked and they just seen what they seen. But I was very fortunate to then get a taste of everything.
Mm-hmm.
So it kind of gave me an appreciation for everything else. Because you're kind of like, right, okay, this is how they do it. This is Corey Taylor without his mask, Jim Root without his mask, and stuff like that as well. It was just like, it was weird to see it because like, obviously like when you're masked up, you're going to be very different. Like persona wise, like it's a very normal psychological thing to be in a mask to act very, very differently. And they had that advantage from an early stage. Like imagine playing Bannermans to your mates in a mask. There's something just a bit strange about it. So,
if everyone knows who you are, it's a bit different. Yeah. I think with Stone Sour, it was actually the Spider-Man soundtrack that had Bother on it.
Okay.
And
was that also with the Hero with Chad Kroger by any chance?
That's
the one. And the guy from Salvia.
Yes, that's that. We're in this.
No
we're on the same. We're in the same boat. But it was
watching.
But Bother, it wasn't named as Stone Sour. It was named as Corey Taylor Bother. And I remember seeing that because my friend had the soundtrack CD case and looking at it and going, Corey Taylor? That's the singer from Slipknot. Like, just having this sort of like, what the fuck kind of moment of like, you know who that is, right? Like,
you are absolutely correct. I've just quickly gave it a Googs, and track 8, Bother, Corey Taylor.
So, to be named as, if they'd named it as Stone Sour, I wouldn't have even paid attention to it. I wouldn't have heard it until it actually got released as a real life single, 6-12 months later.
Mm-hmm.
It had a video as well, right?
Yeah, it was pushed hard. It was on MTV too, like every other fucking song for a moment. I think it was released after Get Inside. I think that was the first Stone Sour song I remember being released.
I think it was also actually in the Roadrunner United concert, if I remember correctly.
Oh.
Weird one, yeah.
Oh.
So
was Stone Sour on
Roadrunner United as often as I can.
No, the Stone Sour weren't, but strangely enough, Corey Taylor was there, and I think he did Bother. I don't know if he did a second Stone Sour song, but what he didn't do was the Slipknot song. The Roadrunner United band played a Slipknot song, which I think we talked about at the time, which was weird.
The Stone Sour drummer was also a big part of the Roadrunner United thing, and he played a few songs. It was basically between him and Joey Jordison, I think, was like the kind of two main guys that played a lot of the songs.
Joey didn't play a lot of drums on the album. The El Nino drummer teamed up with Heafy, and he's on a few of the tracks. But Joey, I think Joey only played on one track, maybe two max of his.
Okay. I meant more the concert. Sorry, my apologies. I didn't explain that
sorry,
well, but
sorry.
yeah,
no, I have no idea.
Most of the gig he did that, but yeah, like because he was like one of the team leaders, right? So I suppose like he was like managerial position rather than actually necessarily a player within the songs and stuff. He has a particular style as well, I suppose. So it's like you wouldn't want just to bash that into every single song that you had as well.
Even the Wikipedia for Bother credits it to Corey Taylor. The picture is presumably his two hands sort of clasped, even though it says Stone Sour Bother, but he's wearing a Spider-Man ring.
Yeah, it was for Spider-Man. It had a good. It had a soundtrack that was of its time, very much in the moment.
There's a weird. I don't know particularly why I was reading about this. I think it might have again came back to Roadrunner United, where I was reading up a little bit on Stone Sour once I realised Jim Root had left. Not a band I've really paid attention to, so I wasn't aware Jim had left the band. So I went back as to why, and apparently having been pretty much there from its inception, before Slipknot and then after Slipknot, he left because quote Stone Sour were it's not even stoned. Stone Sour were all about the money, and I'm like.
That seems a bit ironic, yeah.
Yeah, but you play for Slipknot, and no offense, Slipknot must be
the biggest brand in metal.
to some degree all about the money as well. So I would fucking love to be a fly on a wall during a Slipknot practice session, or even just a couple days on tour. Before we get into the rest of the albums or whatever, do these guys even like each other? Are they just a business at this point?
Well, this is why
weird.
Chris Fenn, he got unceremoniously booted out of the band in between Five and We Are Not Your Kind, and I remember the memes. So it was after Jim Root left Stone Sour, and it's Jim Root as Ralph Wiggum at the back of the bus. Chuckles, I'm in danger.
Yeah.
He's next. If there was anyone who was going to get kicked out of Slipknot next, I think there's a strong chance it could be Jim Root.
Surely not.
Who knows?
I don't know. It's one of the ones that you could and still remain a band that people would listen to, I think. Only Just, though. I think if you booted Mick Thompson...
you're fucked. You're fucked.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just my perception then, because I've always been quite a big fan of the two guitarists. They're two of my favourite masks as well.
Mm-hmm.
And
Jim's my favourite mask as well. I will be.
Yeah.
He's probably one of my favourite members, actually, because if you've seen interviews with him, he's absolutely brilliant. He just seems like a really nice, down to earth guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, fucking hell. There's so much we could go into here, and I'm just going off on an absolute tangent as well. But was Mick not shot in the head a couple of years ago by his brother?
Was that not? Yeah, he got in a feud with his brother or something like that, and it was
yeah,
it was fucking... the most American thing ever.
It obviously didn't do. When I say shot in the head, I think that's an
knife.
understatement.
It was a knife fight. It was 2015.
Oh, I'm sure there was something about a bullet grazing his head or something like grazing his skull or
stabbed in the back of the head.
Jesus.
Jesus.
That's a bit intense. But I'm not gonna lie. If Jim Root was fired from Slipknot, you're getting into the territory now where I'm like, you're stuck. I've spoken about it before in the pod where the band themselves are really important to me. For whoever those individuals are to consist of the band, it's a part of the appeal to that band is that relationship and those people working together to make that music. If you're just interchanging musicians left, right and centre, unless that's your thing from day one, you're gonna start to lose me. I have dropped off of bands like that before because I'm like, you're not actually in it for the joy or beauty of making music. You're one person with session musicians making your own sort of persona as a band.
That's when you become Ghost.
or Paramore. Paramore.
I mean, it's interesting. It's been discussed before how it was, especially during in between after Joey, rest in peace, had left the band, and after Paul had passed, how they'd replaced those members pretty seamlessly, and Chris all got replaced relatively seamlessly from a listener, from a fan perspective. Whether it was just good PR, and they managed to put in these sort of blank slates, and you've got Tortilla Face. Is he one of the new ones?
He's the newest member to be named as, wait for it,
he's a classical pianist. He's
Michael Pfaff. P-F-A-F-F.
Michael Pfaff. He is probably the most overly skilled baseball bat player you will ever know.
So true, man. But he was
classically trained in the keg.
I'd like to think I was classically trained in the keg, boys, if you know what I mean. He was previously in a band with Sean, though, so yeah. That was his intro into the band. He was in a band with Sean called Dirty Little Rabbits. They ran from 2007 to 2012. They're currently on a hiatus, and Sean was apparently very impressed with him musically, and they gelled really well together in Dirty Little Rabbits. So presumably he's just phoned up his mate to be like, you want to fucking get paid $100,000 a year to hit a keg on tour with us? Cool, man, come along.
I would do it.
I would do it.
100% do it. Yeah.
Oh god. So, and it's weird, like with we're probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but like with Alessandro and Jay Weinberg that have came in, you know, these guys are, well, Jay's 31.
He's really young. He's the youngest member.
Yeah,
that's grim. That just makes me feel really terrible.
No, totally. But I mean, he's the son of like a well-known drummer, so like his, like, I think music and percussion and drum is like in his absolute DNA. So,
I think we need to bring up that photo.
Yes, thank you.
Is with Jay Weinberg with his father talking to Joey Jordison or Jim Root, or like talking to Slipknot anyway, and then it's just Jay Weinberg with a Shan Joey Jordison mask as a kid.
It's Corey's. So wait, hang on.
Oh, is that Corey mask? It's a Corey mask.
I thought that was Corey. I thought the short person was. I thought the small person was Corey, and it was Jim and Corey talking. Yeah.
Is that? No way! I didn't know this.
That's Jay Weinberg's dad
talking to
Jim Root.
And he's in a Corey mask, just staring at.
And it's just like one of those like proper like family photos that is probably just in the house somewhere, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I've just met my favourite band, Slipknot," and now he's in it. Like, it's just wild. Like,
his dad is Max Weinberg, who has been the long-time drummer for Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band. So not someone who, you know,
been around the block, definitely.
Yeah, I mean that guy's rock and roll for his entire life. So wait, hang on. So we've gone a bit ahead here. Yes. We've started talking about the members and some gossip and stuff like that.
Quite a bit.
Let's come back. We sort of got to Volume 3. Where were you guys with Slipknot by Volume 3? I was loving the album. I thought it was great. It absolutely is a tonal shift for them. There's still that Slipknot sound, but they've gone a little bit more mainstream, for lack of a better word. They've sort of calmed down some of the weirdness. To their discredit, I don't know. They're still pretty massive, but like, what was Volume 3 for you guys?
Definitely been freaked out a little bit by having an acoustic song.
Yeah.
There, which was just, for them, very left field. That was just kind of caught off guard. Like pre that, they're like, don't wrong. It's not as if it's a band that didn't have singing. It's not as if it was a death metal band that only had roaring up to that point.
Yeah, guttural like throat noises.
Yeah, it's like there's no like Glenn Benton or that, but like, yeah, it was that one definitely caught me off guard. But I think like for me, the track is definitely Duality.
Yeah,
the lyrics, the video, just the whole thing, so singable, such a DJ classic. Again, I think it's like could so easily be the song that you hate because you've heard it too many times.
Yeah,
easily. You've seen it on Scuzz, you've seen it on Kerrang, you've seen it here, there, everywhere. Your dad knows it. That kind of song.
That's a good way of putting it. I never, other than the tracks like I mentioned, Volume 3 is probably one of the ones when I didn't really get into it as much. Certainly nowhere near as much as I got into Iowa in the first album. Like a total. If I've listened to Iowa and Slipknot 1,000 times, I've probably listened to Volume 3 less than 10.
Wow.
Wow.
I cannot, other than the singles, like you said, Duality, you could not escape that song. I love the video.
I was about to say, I was like, involuntarily, you've probably heard it quite a few times.
Very likely.
Again, clubs and yeah.
This week, though, in going through the whole discography, I do not like the guitar tone. I cannot get away with the guitars in it. It sounds, in fact, it might be the whole production of it. It just sounds really muddy and mixed up. Like I don't like the layering of the songs, and it might just be me. I don't know whether there's something in there. I just don't know what it is. I just can't get away with the actual sound of that album.
Is that the Rick Rubin album?
It is the Rick Rubin album,
which is so unexpected because you expect if it's Rick Rubin, the big name, you expect it to be like top notch. But I think when he's mentioned it was like there was a bit of a sprat behind the scenes there somewhere.
Some conflict, one may say.
Corey hated it. Corey hated how sort of uninvolved Rick Rubin really is, because he's not, as much as he's the Rick Rubin the person, he's just one guy, and he would be having like loads of projects on at once. Jim Root has a different take on it. Jim said that Rick would spend loads of time like with the guitars and trying to get the right sort of lines and sound, bizarrely. But then Corey hated that experience. He has not got a good recollection of that. He was drinking heavily at the time, and he doesn't feel like Rick was really involved as much as he should or could have been.
Yeah, whereas for Jim, it's like, well, up until that quote, it's, one of his favourite albums that they'd recorded. Corey is blatantly stated he'll never work with Rick Rubin again. So clearly, two very different experiences from the one guy. It's widely said that he wasn't particularly present physically in the studio, but I think from what you're trying to say, Lev, and what Jim was saying, he was involved where he needed to be, potentially, in the actual physical production of the album, but he wasn't there to like hold people's hands through it, sort of thing. He did take on a lot of work. He was doing other albums at the time, and I think Corey felt he wasn't giving Slipknot the attention it deserved, and Jim was like, I'm fine with that. I'll just send the guy my guitar tracks and see what his feedback is.
Yeah, and again, like Alan said there, Rick Rubin, he's a massive name in alternative culture, but he is only one person, and he would take on multiple things at once. And maybe he just thought, you know what, Corey, your vocals are absolutely perfect no matter what you do. But I think Corey's said like some of the takes that they have were like right at the beginning, and even then he was like, that was like the only ones I liked. He just never liked what he did, and whether that was influenced by his drinking at the time, I don't know.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe speaks to the place Corey was in, that if he was in a bad place mentally, drinking heavily during the entire recording process, maybe he's just sort of pushing that off onto Rick. But yeah, who knows. Volume 3 has probably my favourite Slipknot song, and it's not Duality.
Before I forget.
Fucking right, before I forget.
It's a good song. I will agree that is a really, really good song.
And also available on Guitar Hero.
Surely that's not the only Slipknot song available on Guitar Hero.
Oh, I imagine not now. Yeah. I think
yeah.
you can upload your own tracks and do it now, but I think like at the time that was like the only one that you could.
No, I think I seem to remember
career
it, yeah.
mode or whatever.
Yeah, but I don't know what it is about Before I Get. I mean, I was talking about Left Behind earlier, and there's more songs that have stuck with me throughout their releases, but just without a shadow of a doubt, and I don't even know why, it's not even the most Slipknot song, I would say, but Before I Forget has just forever been that, so like from the riff, from the opening riff all the way through, you've kind of got that weird solo sort of in the middle with like Corey singing over it as well. It's always held something for me, and yeah, Before I Forget, 100% my favourite Slipknot song.
And the video
without the masks.
Yeah. Well, you say without the masks, but you don't really see.
But you didn't see them.
But they're hanging off them, and speaking of the time, so this is after the Stone Sours, after the Murder Dolls. It's now got to a point in 2004 where it's no longer a secret who these people are, and it was much more. It was a way. I think the Before I Get video is very much a sort of message to be like, we are coming out of our shell a bit, and we want to just be musicians, not just clowns in masks or whatever. It was a really good video. It was a really poignant video, I remember.
Yeah, I think it was done to see it's the sort of first and only video without their masks. There's a variation in the Vermilion video, but they're still masked to some description. It was done really well, and the way it's cut and the way it's edited and stuff like that, I thought was awesome, and probably did contribute to why I liked it. But you guys had also said in the chat, Volume 3 is where they was, and I've sort of said it earlier that it was a turning point, but you sort of had said you referred to it being their more mature album, or their most mature album. So even to date, if I understood you correctly, this is their most mature album. Like, I don't know if I really understood that or what you sort of meant.
I still
especially compared to some of the stuff.
Whether I understand what I'm saying with it is another thing. But I definitely absolutely stand by it, and I will fisticuffs if I have to.
So when you say mature, how is it more mature? How does it remain more mature than the following albums, like All Hope Is Gone?
I think it's
We Are Not Your Kind and The Great Chapter.
For me, it was they were still maybe not finding their feet, but they found their feet as well. Where they're like, they were still they were evolving from Slipknot and Iowa, which were obviously like the best and the coolest albums.
Cultural phenomenons, like literal cultural phenomenons, and now this is the third album.
And it's to this day, their biggest tracks are still like Duality and Before I Forget.
Mm-hmm.
Like theoretically, I'll just quick look at Spotify just to double check.
It's the most popular album. It is.
It's Duality and Before I Forget are like the biggest songs. So there's definitely something that they've done right that has then became anthemic for them.
Okay.
Is to have
quick question.
Brought those songs in.
Quick question. So you've found someone. They like metal. They like rock, but they've never listened to Slipknot before. Which album, which track, do you say, go listen to that and make your mind up?
Volume 3.
I would say Iowa.
I would say Iowa too, but I think if you gave them Duality or Before I Forget as a first song, and then just listen to those two songs, listen to Duality, listen to Before I Forget, then go to Iowa, then go to the first album, and then go back the way and see how you feel about Volume 3 afterwards.
It depends on your mate, I suppose. Like, if it's your mate that's into grindcore or something like that, you have to send them directly to Iowa.
Yeah.
Like, do not pass go, do not collect £200. Like, and yeah. Whereas, like, if it's your mate that doesn't even really like metal, they probably will actually walk away from Volume 3 liking at least a bit of it.
Absolutely funny you should say that, because previous guest, a friend of the pod, Gaz Clinton, who was with us during Rage Against the Machine, Gaz and I had known each other for years, and we were talking about albums we could have done and stuff like that before he came on for Rage Against the Machine, and he actually suggested Slipknot. Now, I nearly fell off my chair when he told me that, because my understanding of Gaz was he did not like metalcore or nu metal in any way, shape or form. You know, he was a Queens of the Stone Age fucking alt rock, grunge rock kind of sort of dude. Not that he's obviously incapable of listening to heavier music, but for him to say Slipknot, I mean, he used to, I think I was, you know, at a drunk party one time, I was like, oh man, fucking Killswitch Engage, and he's like, oh yeah, that clicky music, because he was taking the piss out of the drum triggers, you know, and I was just like, all right, you know, don't need to fucking talk it, but yeah, when he was like, oh no, genuinely like Volume 3, I was like, fucking hell, like that's, for that to have that cross appeal, yeah, a safe bet would be Volume 3, but if they're already a metal fan, I'd be like, go listen to Iowa and go nuts.
I feel like Volume 3 was the one that I was allowed to put on in the car.
With the parents.
With my parents, yeah. It was like, that was the one that was like, you're allowed to put one CD on, and it's not Iowa, it's not Slipknot, it's like Volume 3, you can maybe do it. Your wee sister might be a bit angry, but you're allowed to listen to it.
I mean,
put Vanillion back on. That one's totally acceptable.
Like, in all fairness, I fucking love Vermilion Part 1 and 2. Like, are they Slipknot songs? I don't really know they're
that was a big like that was a big gamble.
yeah,
Like
no,
for a
totally.
band to do like that kind of like acousticy kind of thing, from being like the Boiler Suit Maniacs to doing an acoustic song.
I'm going to interrupt. I'm going to interrupt that. It had been done before. Metallica did it with the Black Album. In fact, Metallica did it with Ride the Lightning and Fade to
Well,
Black.
they done it, yeah.
One, Fade to Black.
And Justice as well, yeah.
Nothing else matters. They were setting a stage for metal bands to do things like what Slipknot got away with on Volume 3 by making acoustic music accessible to a metal fan, to sort of make a point that music doesn't have to be all screams and guitar distortion to be heavy. Heavy is very subjective. You can listen to a guy with an acoustic guitar singing really dark shit and it's heavy. And I think the metal fan has to make a switch go off in their head to accept that, because they just want fucking screams and gutturals to realize, oh, this is heavy as fuck. But then you put like Vermilion on. I think Vermilion's a really, really heavy song, yet it's one of, at the time, Slipknot's lightest. You know?
I like that you brought up the heavy chat, because I've had ridiculously long conversations about the concept of heavy, because it's such a wide, vague thing where it's like, yeah, you can get like, I don't know, like Electric Wizard, that's the slowest, doomy, Black Sabbathy kind of riffs out there, and it's very simple bluesy stuff, but it's also heavy. Then you also get like, yeah, Slipknot that do it as well, like when you do acoustic songs like that are also heavy. Like, and it's like, the weirdest claim that I've ever had was a guy I used to go to college with, was that he claimed that Lamb of God was the heaviest thing that ever existed.
Mm.
And he was like, anything beyond that is just silly fast stuff. And like, don't wrong, I absolutely vehemently disagreed with exactly what he said, but it was just like, it was just this claim that this guy had that has just stuck with me forever, the idea of like heavy and stuff like that. And it's like, I just say, like, you can have acoustic songs that are heavy. You can have these things that are heavy.
Yeah, Lav and I just, when you just said that Lamb of God thing, Lav and I just made the exact same face. We both just like squinted and tilted our heads like, really? Lamb of God? Don't get me wrong, Lamb of God are a heavy band, but it is so subjective, and it comes to not even the context of the band, but the context of the song. Like we're saying, Vermilion is a heavy song because it's tonally dark and almost sounds bleak, but I'm pretty sure it's supposed to be quite a positive message within the lyrics, and it's, yeah, like we're trying to describe feelings here. It's kind of weird, but like it's totally, I think we're all on the same page here of heavy is subjective, but this acoustic number from Slipknot is a curveball from the band, not necessarily within metal music itself, but it was a risk. To come back to what you were saying, Alan, it is a risk for them to have put that out there, because it's their first time doing this. You know, it's only their third album, and
Potentially alienating people very quickly.
yeah, you could do, absolutely. But I loved it.
Fantastic you bring the word alienate in, because I think that is precisely what All Hope Is Gone did to me.
Next album. Hey listeners, just Keith coming in here to say this is the end of part 1 of Slipknot. We recorded the whole conversation as a oneer, so we didn't really quite work out the logistics of how to split it into 2 parts. There's no what are you listening to here for part 1, unfortunately. That's going to follow in part 2. It's been a great conversation so far. It's been awesome having Alan on, and we continue the conversation with the rest of the albums in part 2. So please join us then for part 2 next week on Alive or Just Blethering. What was your thoughts on part 1? How did you feel about the first 3 albums Slipknot put out? Give us a shout out at AOGB Podcast for Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course if you'd like to email us in, aogbpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to having you back for part 2 of Slipknot with Alan Swan. We'll see you next week.